Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you today?
Doing well. Still sorting things out.
And bringing the news.
I don't know whether I'm smarter than I was a year ago or not. A lot of people would argue with me. But I think, in spite of the fact that I think I had a pretty good understanding of immunities, both politically and medically, than a lot of experts on TV.
Sure. Yeah.
But I still feel like I've learned a lot, about how the immune system can be very beneficial if we had more people informed about it. And although it was taught to us in medical school, it was sort of taken for granted for so long, and all of a sudden, all that learning was canceled out with a few demagogues and a few people, ranting and raving about this, and then having these lockdowns and the people just rolling over. So it's rather astonishing. But today we'll probably have a couple points to make where maybe there's a little reversal going on there.
Yeah.
The numbers of people who are saying, hey, wait a minute, I think those numbers are growing. You'd think there would be more wisdom come out of Israel with regard to the viruses and immunity and the vaccines and the booster shots, because they've worked hard at it, They list themselves as a democratic state in a positive way, but it turns out they're very authoritarian.
Yeah.
But there's, of course, the United States is very authoritarian too. But who would have ever dreamed that we'd see what is going on in Australia right now? They're very authoritarian.
Yeah.
But anyway, Israel's done a lot of inoculation.
Yes,
They've
they
had
have.
a lot of people, and every time another variant comes out, you need another vaccine.
Yeah.
So maybe they have some investments in some company somewhere. But the big debate now is how many people must have the fourth shot.
Yeah.
And they say, well, the second and third didn't do so well, and maybe the first one didn't do so well too, because a few famous people now still, they would have the most qualified doctors taking care of them.
Yeah.
The military generals and the politicians and everybody, they should have had the shot at the right time and all the proper boosters. And yet, lo and behold, I'll bet when the dust settles that we will find out that there have been more complications with disease and all the problems that we talk about in these past 2 years. It'll be much worse than people who had all the vaccines than those who said, I believe in natural immunity and I'm going to stick to my guns and I have a right to do that. But right now it's still risky, to say those kind of things, and you can get punished for it. But I think when people look at this more objectively, they're going to realize that we were way off base, and I think we have somebody that you're going to quote that sort of admits that they've been off base. But anyway, I think that this whole thing, debate over the fourth booster shot, is sort of, it's unreal.
Yeah.
I wonder if, I don't think the world has ever come close to doing anything like that. Just pounding away. Yeah, we've heard of boosters, and we heard of, even delayed boosters. For years they gave boosters for tetanus and things, and it wasn't unheard of. But this, having the fourth booster within a year of all this stuff, that's rather bizarre, and still people are getting sick there. No less so than in other places of the world. And sometimes I think the people who have had all the shots are probably, for the future, are more in danger than those who never got any.
Well, can you imagine what would happen if you've gotten your fourth polio shot in the year and you came down with polio? People would not be too happy about that. So, but I think, you're right when you say the smoke clears. They're going to talk about damage that was done, but they're also going to mitigate the death toll. And we know that because even Walensky is saying we need to make some distinction between people that died with and from COVID. So I think we're going to start seeing that come out. But the Israel study is very, very important. Unfortunately, we've said it over and over, poor Israelis have been lab rats for their governments and for big pharma. They've been stuck more than anyone. They finally, at Sheba Medical Center, they did a landmark study over the past month, studying the effects of the fourth dose. Let's put up that first clip, because it's from the Times of Israel. Israeli trial, the world's first, finds that the fourth dose is, quote, not good enough against Omicron. Now they say that the doses are good for the previous strains. That may be true. We don't know. But they say it doesn't work for Omicron like they had hoped. And in fact, let's put up the next clip because this is interesting. So, hours after releasing the results, Sheba published a statement. This is the university that did the study, published a statement calling for, quote, continuing the vaccination drive for risk groups at the time, even though the vaccine doesn't provide optimal protection against getting infected with the variant, end quote. And this is the last line from the Times of Israel article. Hebrew media is reporting that the hospital was pressured into issuing that statement after the health ministry didn't like the publication of the study's initial results. So the politicians in the health ministry did not like the science that came out of the university, so they pressured the university, you better add a line there telling people they still need to take these things even though they don't work.
Yes, and they'll do this, and the saying goes that once you come down with the infection, even though you've been fully vaccinated, it's always added on because they have been such champions of the vaccine. They say, but you would have been a lot worse off. You might have been on a respirator. Something. So they always put that in there that it could be a lot worse. But they never compare it to, are they worse off than the people who never took any vaccine? And that's where the evidence will continue to grow, where people who didn't have access to it didn't necessarily suffer more so. We have the evidence in our states and all. The states that did not do the lockdowns and didn't pound away, that they didn't do a lot worse.
They didn't do worse, no. Well, that's the thing about this. The narrative was initially back in April, even as late as April and May, that these shots will protect 100% against catching the virus. That is obviously not true. But the narrative is falling apart in other places, and let's stay in Israel right now because this is a fascinating interview with the head of their vaccines. Let's put this up if we can, this next clip. This is Professor Cyril Cohen. He's the head of immunology at the Bar Ilan University, and he is one of the chief vaccine for the government. And he says, quote, "We have made mistakes." And it's an interview with him on the website Unheard. But let's go to the next one because there are some bombshell admissions from here. An honest professor, he's a member of the advisory committee for vaccines for the Israeli government. Listen what he's saying, Dr. Paul. The vaccine passport concept is no longer relevant in the Omicron era and should be phased out. He expects that to happen, he said. He and his colleagues are surprised and disappointed that the vaccines did not prevent transmission as they originally had hoped. The biggest mistake of the pandemic, he said, in Israel was closing the schools and education. He apologized for that. He also said widespread infection is now an inevitable part of future immunity, otherwise known as herd immunity, which is what people were arguing, the Barrington and before, Alex Barrington, everyone, from the very beginning. And the last one, if we can just keep that up there, please, that Omicron has accelerated the pandemic into the endemic phase, in which COVID will essentially be like the flu. These are pretty amazing revelations from a top Israeli government official.
At the beginning, if you ever used the word passport, it was considered really, really bad manners and bad science and the whole works. And you weren't even allowed to talk about it. But it's interesting how this scientist now reports that it's no longer necessary to pursue this thing of vaccine passports. And it's probably been said by some of the oppositions casually like this, but to me it was so casual. That was what they were really thinking about all along. But to think about that 2 years ago, oh boy, you were really a bad guy.
You were out in left field.
When we think about these pros and cons and where to go and could we have fully tested things before? Well, this was done. they had to have an emergency, and that was shared by Republicans and Democrats, and you had to go and show you were active and move along. So you need a lot of money, and you had to make a deal with corporations, the pharmaceutical companies, and you had to do one other thing: exempt them from liability.
Yep.
And that's how they made a mistake. The government regulations and approval process probably has done some good, but it's done a lot of harm. But it's not a proper function of government. But there was a time when it wouldn't have been so outlandish as this has been this past year on what they could do without proper approval. Now they're up to the fourth dose, and they're still wonder what to do now.
Yeah.
I guess it's best we go ahead and do this, and maybe a little bit of waiting, or maybe those companies, if they had a little bit of responsibility and liability on this, maybe they would have been moved in a different direction in order to try to protect the patients.
It's pretty easy to look into Pfizer's history of bad medicine, of lying, of being punished, of being fined for lying for bad medicine. All you had to do was do that. But, we found out from Fauci's financial release that he's made a lot of money during the so-called crisis. So it's worked for some people, where it's put a lot of other people in a bad way. Well, let's look at the next story, which is really another sick story. We're angry about it. But we're going to start with the good part of that story. So let's put on that first clip. They kicked out Djokovic. They kicked him out of Australia. He won't be able to play. He won't be able to. It's a stain on what would have been, I think, his fourth straight win at the Australian Open, the greatest tennis player of all time. It would have been. They've destroyed that, and they did it all for political reasons. But here's Newsweek: the Novak Djokovic saga causes refunds to outstrip ticket sales at the Australian Open. People are voting with their dollars, and they're saying, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, we're not even going to go.
No, and that happened here. When the height of these demonstrations at football games was going on, and all the lockdown, and nobody was there, and what happening, and things are changing now because the attitudes have changed. And that means that's the vote that we have to look at, not just the nonsense we hear from Washington and the pontification, that they will take care of this. But the thing about this on sports, I've talked about sports a lot, and I've complained a lot about, and what was it, 1980?
Yeah, the Olympics,
Carter canceled the United States going there because of us agitating the Russians, just like we're doing again.
Yeah.
The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. So they did that. My argument was, that bringing people together to play sports, we should have been playing against the Cubans in baseball a long time ago, and that might have gotten some of this aggressive attitude out of the way. So. But this is almost the opposite of that. I noticed it on a personal basis that Republicans and Democrats, when I was there, it wasn't quite like it is now.
Yeah.
Now it's really vicious.
Yeah.
But one thing I did know, that there were disagreements, and sometimes it would get pretty strong. But I tell you what, when we played the congressional baseball game, Republicans against the Democrats, there was something about the people we were playing with. You remembered people who played baseball with us. It was completely different. It was above politics.
Yeah. It
didn't matter much. We played baseball together, and that's it. But this is almost the opposite, is what they're doing this with Djokovic. They're antagonizing people. They're splitting and causing dissension, and not bringing people together. And so they're using sports in a schizophrenic way, and they're using it. But I think overall, the sports still are better, and maybe because there's a lot of cheering going on for Djokovic right now.
Yeah.
And even though they really spited him, I mean, now it's vicious what they have done. It had nothing to do with saving lives and medical care and all that. It was all pure politics, and just can't stand somebody that would be willing to sacrifice his reputation and money and everything else because he believes believed in something strongly enough that he was willing to challenge them.
Yeah.
They can't stand.
that.
They get rid of them, get them out of the way, send them home. We don't want to see them again. And now, what the French? You'd think maybe the French would stand up and act more adult-like and welcome him, but it looks like there's a tennis match over there, and he might not get to play in that.
The French Open and even the U.S. Open in New York, because they've got a vax mandate. So they want to destroy the best tennis player probably in history. They want to destroy him. They want to grind him into the dirt, as you say, for political reasons. And our friend Tom Luongo had a good piece on Lou Rockwell today, where he talks about they're not even ashamed of the fact that it's for political. In fact, they're proud of it. Let's put up that next quote, that next picture if we can. Alex Hawke's his name. He's the immigration minister for Australia. He out and out admitted that it's politics. And this is from an article about the deportation. He accepted Djokovic's recent COVID-19 infection meant that he was a negligible risk to those around him, but he was, quote, perceived by some as a talisman of a community of anti-vaccine sentiment. So he posed, just leave it up now, he posed no threat to anyone, they admit it, but the fact that people look up to him made him dangerous. He said, I consider that Djokovic's ongoing presence in Australia may lead to an increase in anti-vaccination sentiment generated in the Australian community, leading to civil unrest, etc., etc. Mr. Djokovic is a person of influence and status. Oh. That's what they didn't like. And the last thing he said, having regard to Mr. Djokovic's conduct after receiving a positive COVID result, he publicly stated his views as well as his unvaccinated status. I consider his ongoing presence in Australia may encourage other people to disregard or act inconsistently with public health advice and policies in Australia. Translation, if he's allowed to stay, other people might not obey us, and that's what we want above all.
You know, you mentioned one thing that caught my attention, because the people that are promoting this and trying to hurt Djokovic said that it didn't bother them that they didn't have any shame. There's no shame. They don't feel badly about it at all. And I think this is such a good example of how sociopaths think, because they have no social etiquette at all. They have no sense of decency. They don't have a higher law. They have just themselves for the immediate effect of what they're doing, and it might be political power. It might be it right there. It might be money. It might be both. But that is what drives them, and they live by it, and they refuse to say, well, maybe there's a higher law of decency, how you ought to treat people, and when you make mistakes or have an accident and somebody gets hurt, the natural thing should be to, I'm sorry, doing this. But no shame. No, they don't have any shame, and that means that the people who say that and use it, and so often we see this in politics. They're sociopaths. They have no sense of right and wrong.
Yeah. Well, Scott Morrison is the Prime Minister of Australia. He's one of the chief criminals, one of the chief fascists that are running the country, and he was all blustery when they decided to deport Djokovic. He said, I've kept this country safe. I've kept our death rate the lowest of anywhere. I've kept the infections lower than everywhere because of what I'm doing. We can't have someone like him over here, suggesting otherwise. Well, hey, Mr. Morrison, how's that working out for you? Let's put on this next clip. This is from the top of Drudge today from Yahoo News. Mr. Morrison, how's this working out? Australia suffers deadliest day of pandemic as Omicron drives up hospital cases. It's not working, Scott Morrison. You destroyed your country. You turned it fascist for nothing. He's a really bad guy.
Well, time will tell. Hopefully, truth will prevail.
I'm getting worked up over here.
We want to promote that a little bit here and there, because I still do believe that when people are offered this, the choice between good and evil in a reasonable fashion, that most people would rather play baseball than drop bombs on each other.
Absolutely.
I'm sure, because I think there have been times when I think of how people go to movies and musicals and sporting events and all this, and boy, that doesn't seem very productive. But all of a sudden I see this different. looks like they're having fun.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe that's a lot more important than me deciding, well, no, you should be doing something different with your life. But to have that and having fun is one thing, but that, of course, is what they don't really care about, you know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of not caring about anyone, let's think about the U.S. military and what they've done to so many people. They've kicked out so many people. They've destroyed their lives, destroyed their careers. You know, this whole support the troops, that's a bumper sticker. That's not the policy of the U.S. military. And here we have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the guy with shots in all of his arms, everywhere you can imagine. Let's put up the next pic. Uh-oh, Chairman. The shots didn't work. Joint Chiefs Chairman and Marine Corps Commandant both have COVID-19. Mark Milley has received his vaccine and a booster. So the whole rationale for forcing these military people who are at very low risk because they're predominantly young and very fit, for forcing them to do it was to prevent transmission. Guess what, General Milley? They don't, and you're the living proof that they don't. Who's going to apologize to all these ruined lives of the service members?
Yeah, and we'd much rather, learn more about science, and we need more experimentation. We need to give more boosters because we're studying endocarditis, and we're going to have all the victims there that we can study and figure out why they are getting sick after these boosters. But that is really tragic. But there's several of the military leaders. Austin, Lord Austin also was positive, and this is the whole thing. But they don't say, anybody in the group of the Marines that refused the shot, and there were quite a few.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many of them are all of a sudden sick and in the hospital. But I don't know how many.
Yeah.
There has to have been some, just because that's the way the world works. But don't you think that the other side's capable of making use of somebody being sick and even dying from this disease and say, see, they deserve this, because they wouldn't take the vaccine, and this is a good example. They've used them as good as examples all along. But that to me is so tragic. But it's good that there's been none reported. Maybe there have been some, but it's amazing that most likely there's been more people that are in the news right now that have been vaccinated. And I'm fascinated with that's getting in the news. There was a time when they would never tell you that that they've had their shots.
Yeah, I know, and it's interesting. Very, very few military members have died of COVID. Very, very few. If we talk about how much the military, I'm just looking at an article here in Newsweek. COVID deaths in military spike in last 4 months, despite 96% being vaccinated. So people are dying from it in there, even though it may be because of the fact that they're taking these shots. So the whole thing is a failure. Hopefully there'll be some justice in the end. Ultimately, there will be justice in the end, but that might not come in this world. But I would just finish out by thanking our if we're done, thanking our viewers and reminding them. I don't know how it works for you guys, but when I go to my YouTube and I'm logged into Google and I go to YouTube, I used to see Ron Paul Liberty Report as a suggested because I check in several times to see how well are we doing. Is anyone watching our show? Are we just talking to ourselves? And I used to have it in recommended and suggested. I never see it anymore. I don't know if that's the same for you, if you don't see it anymore, but that means, at least to me, that they're hiding it. They don't want people to see what we have to say, and it's a cheap way of doing it, but it's a way of censoring people. So if that's the case with you, please subscribe to the channel, press like, share the show. Maybe we can trick the algorithms to have it be a little bit more prominent, but we're working our hardest to try to bring some information that may not be popular with some of the censors, and they're doing their job to make sure that nobody sees it. So let's defeat the bad guys and try to promote the show if we can, and we certainly thank you for doing that.
Even when we first started this program, 5 years ago or so.
At least.
Anyway, and I've admitted, that I have no expertise when it comes to computers and understanding social media and all. But I did understand something about the need to have a platform. You have to have a place to park this kind of stuff. And from the very beginning, we talked about it. What can we do and what can we use? And even though I wasn't the technician that knew and understood when and how that was going to come about, I had a lot of optimism, because from the very beginning of the internet, all I remember is the very first people who started communicating on the internet were libertarian. I said, I think that the libertarian efforts, the people will be able to take the internet and have it as competition against the people if they get too big and too ornery. And I think that's coming. I think it's out there, and I think we still talk about it, and we still have some plans on what we have to do if necessary. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to get our message out, because we do use the internet. We do reach people. Maybe it's been compromised, but I think finding information on the internet is where I find it fantastic. I don't think they're going to, it looks too big to me for somebody to come along and say, so long, this is done. But it's always a threat. But I tell you what, ideas are the most important things, and it has been said that armies can't stop an idea that time has come. But the ideas, let's say the ideas whose time has come, can't be stopped by people misusing the internet and trying to destroy the effort to get out good information. So for that reason, I will remain optimistic that somebody's going to come along and make sure we have the technology to spread the message of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.